A warm welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Millicent Walker. These are the highlights of the program this week. Pentagon leak suspect Jack Teixeira arrested, charged with unauthorized retention and transmission of classified documents. Plus, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says the United States has never given up attempts to conduct intelligence activities on Russia and that Moscow is always ready with corresponding countermeasures. But before that, let's check other top stories in diplomatic circles.
Political leaders past and present were in Northern Ireland to commemorate 25 years of the Good Friday Agreement at a dinner at Hillsborough Castle hosted by British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The event was attended by key architects of the agreement, including former U.S. President Bill Clinton, former U.S. Senator George Michel, and former Irish Prime Minister Bertie Ahern. In 1998, Blair and his Irish counterpart Ahern helped Irish nationalists and British Unionists craft an intricate power-sharing deal that paved the way for militants on both sides to lay down arms.
If there is one message from this hall tonight, one message from the people of Northern Ireland to the world, it is surely this: we will never go back.
I can tell you, Northern Ireland is a world away today from the Northern Ireland defined by bombs and bullets that I grew up with.
Foreign ministers of India and Russia are discussing free trade agreement and are in advanced negotiation on a treaty that Russia's Trade and Industry Minister Denis Moturov said will bring a guarantee of bilateral investment. India has not explicitly criticized Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which Moscow described as a special military operation, and has called for a peaceful resolution of the conflict through dialogue.
We also are in advanced negotiation on a new bilateral investment treaty, and we appreciate that this is perhaps necessary, certainly useful, to provide sufficient confidence to investors. Now, there has been some talk, rightly in my payments, logistics, certifications. These are really the key areas, and I'm convinced that it's possible to really find solutions.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has visited his troops in the military headquarters in Ukraine's Moscow-controlled parts of southern Kherson and the Russia's National Guard in occupied Luhansk regions to hear reports firsthand from his military commanders. Footage initially posted on the Kremlin's website contradicts the statement. In the clip, released by Mr. Putin's press office, the Russian president can be clearly heard saying that the Easter holiday is coming up. Such trips by the Russian leader are rare, although he made a surprise visit to the city of Mariupol in March. Russian troops retreated from the city of Kherson late last year, losing the only regional capital it had managed to capture since Moscow invaded Ukraine in February 2022. However, some of the region remains under Russian control. In another development, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky paid a surprise visit to a hospital in the Donetsk region. Mr. Zelensky met with wounded soldiers and handed out awards, inspected an operating theater and a medevac bus. President Zelensky also visited troops in the small eastern city of Advikia and lauded them for their service. Czech Republic Prime Minister Peter Fiala met with his Filipino counterpart Ferdinand Marcos Jr. at the presidential palace in Manila for bilateral talks to improve relations between both countries. The heads of state expressed shared interest in maintaining peace in the region and improving the business and tech environment. In December, Marcos met with Fiala in an Association of Southeast Asian Nations and EU commemorative summit in Belgium, where the two leaders discussed bilateral trade and technological assistance in the defense sector.
We hope that our visit will be a new start for successful cooperation between our companies. Our companies offer solutions in many fields, many areas: agriculture, aviation, transportation, or space technologies. Defense and security cooperation is very important in our relations. I fully support the talks about delivering transport aircrafts and other projects in the aviation sector.
The U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, has confirmed arrest of a suspect named Jack Teixeira for alleged involvement in leaking Pentagon classified government documents, and he has appeared in court. The leak, described by the Pentagon as a deliberate criminal act, is set to contain a range of intelligence assessments about the war in Ukraine and other sensitive intelligence about countries around the world, including U.S. allies. The 21-year-old suspect, who is a member of the intelligence wing of the Massachusetts Air National Guard, was taken into custody from his family's North Dighton home in Massachusetts. Teixeira could be looking at 15 years in prison if found guilty on both counts.
Well, two things. First, I'll say that this is an ongoing investigation being led by the Department of Justice. So we are consulting with them on an ongoing basis, but that investigation will reveal more documents that have been previously posted. And again, we're doing our own internal review assessment. As I said at the top, this is being led by our Intelligence and Security Department to get a better assessment of what documents were disclosed and where they surfaced online.
Global Affairs analyst Calvin Dark joins me now. Welcome to Diplomatic Channel.
Good to be here.
The full complaint document filed by the U.S. government confirms that Jack Teixeira has held top security clearance since 2021, as part of his role in the Air National Guard. Is it not shocking to think that someone so young and far down the chain of command could have access to such classified and sensitive documents?
Actually, his age and low rank don't really shock or surprise me. And here's why. When it comes to the age, yes, 21 is definitely young, but we have people younger than that, 18 and over, who are serving our military in war zones. So I tend to think that if we're going to, believe they're responsible enough to risk their lives in war zones, they're also responsible enough to respect the laws regarding classified documents and security clearances. So the age isn't a problem for me. The low rank also isn't a shock to me because there's always going to be a need for lower level administrative staff to have access to this information so they can properly serve their higher ups. Because think about it, we can't have top generals and military leaders running tech support or doing administrative tasks. So age and low rank don't really faze me that much. What does shock me is that there weren't the protections in place to detect and to stop someone like the suspect from either transferring this information electronically or even just taking pictures of it and getting out of the secure facility with it. I think that's the bigger question because, that's something that we need to focus on. The Pentagon needs to focus on regardless of the person's age or rank.
And the U.S. national security community is grappling with the fallout from the release of the dozens of the documents, including the impact on sensitive information sharing within the government and also ties with other countries. Do you think we're foreseeing more strained diplomatic relations in the coming days?
I think we'll see more strained relations in the short term because obviously countries don't like the fact that things they were trying to keep secret or discussions they were having with the United States or other allies are out there now in the public. So I do think in the short term, there are going to be some awkward exchanges, I'm sure, between U.S. officials and our counterparts with our allies. But I think in the long term, it's not going to have that much of an effect. I think the reality is that all countries know that all other countries gather intelligence, even against their allies. So I don't think it'll have a long-term effect, but I do think in the short term, it's going to make us less equipped with the intelligence we need, because I imagine our allies and our adversaries are going to be changing up how they conceal their information after this leaked information in the leaked documents.
And, you know, some say it appears to have caught the Biden administration flat-footed, the Department of Defense standing up an interagency effort to try to look at the national security implications. But do you think the documents are real? Is there a question about, you know, it being real or not?
You know, if we look at the reaction from the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice, you know, by making the arrests that they did this past week, that says to me that at least some of the documents are genuine. However, this is what makes a very dangerous situation. We also know that it appears some of the information in these leaked documents was altered. So think about the kind of situation that creates, where we've got documents out there that we know there's accurate and inaccurate information in it, but the only people that know which is the Pentagon, the Department of Justice, and our intelligence services. So that makes it even more difficult, because we may have people who are depending on information in the documents that's inaccurate.
And talking about those information, do you think it shows any disparity between perhaps the official accounts and reality of NATO's operations in Ukraine? And do you think they're damaging?
Well, I think that they reflect the reality that obviously the United States and its allies, you know, with Ukraine, they're not going to be completely transparent about the state of affairs, because Russia and Russia's allies could take advantage of that. So I don't think there's any surprise that what we may be getting from, you know, our officials here in the United States is not as real as what we saw in these documents, because there are obviously real challenges that are happening with Ukraine. I think that the main damage when it comes to, you know, the disparity between what's in the documents and what our officials have been saying is morale, because it definitely hurts the morale of the Ukrainians, and it might even boost the morale of the Russians to know that maybe, you know, the Ukrainians aren't succeeding as well as the Ukrainian president says they are. And, you know, the narrative has been outside of Russia that Russia is not succeeding in this illegal war. Well, some of this information may give Russians a bit of a morale boost to say, hey, we're not doing as bad as the narrative around the world says we are.
Although the leak stirs memories of past legendary leaks, U.S. officials say it so far does not reach the scale and scope of the 700,000 documents, videos, diplomatic cables that appeared on the WikiLeaks website in 2013. What are your thoughts?
I think that's true, and I think that's good. But you know what else is different about this time? If you compare it with WikiLeaks, you know, Edward Snowden, even Chelsea Manning, the difference this time is it appears that the motive behind this suspect was criminal, that, you know, he knew he wasn't supposed to be sharing it. I think some of the people on the internet, part of the internet, World Wide Web, where he shared it, said it was just to boost, you know, his reputation that he had access to these documents. The reason that's going to be important is if we think about the Edward Snowdens and the Chelsea Mannings, you had a lot of people in the United States who supported them because they knew their goals were at least to bring to light something that the U.S. government was doing that they didn't approve of, or that they thought they were hiding from the American people. And, you know, folks realized that they did it the wrong way, the illegal way, but at least what they were trying to do was somewhat noble. That doesn't appear to be the case in this case. And I don't know if that's going to have a real legal effect, because, you know, he broke the law. I don't know if that's going to factor into him legally, but it does factor into how the public views him and how the public is not going to support him as they might have given the others benefit of the doubts in the previous leaks of documents.
For Americans who remember the Vietnam War era vividly, the idea of leaking government information instantly conjures the name of Daniel Ellsberg, who disclosed the Pentagon Papers in 1971. He has been credited with hastening the end of that war. Do you see this leak with Jack Teixeira ending the war in Ukraine?
I don't believe that these documents are going to contribute that much to what happens in the war in Ukraine. However, I do see, as far as the United States is concerned, as you know, we have Republicans who are in charge of the House of Representatives now, at least until the next election. And a lot of Republicans who don't want any more money spent on Ukraine, or who have said that Ukraine hasn't spent the money properly that we've already given, they can use parts of these leaked documents as proof to make their case. And that may affect the support that the U.S. gives to Ukraine. But now, how it actually changes the war, I don't think it'll have that much of an effect.
More of the realities of this leaks is, it appears Washington hasn't just been spying on its enemies, it's also been spying on its friends, like Israel, South Korea. What does this tell us?
Well, I think this tells us that the United States intelligence services realize that we have to be able to independently evaluate what's going on with our allies. Just because, say, Ukraine or Israel says that we have this under control, or our military is going to be able to succeed in doing this, we have to be able to verify that if we're going to implicate ourselves. So like I was saying before, obviously this is going to make things awkward with our allies, but I think they realize that all allies spy on each other, and they do it for the reasons to make sure they know what they're getting into before we step into something with our allies. So I think that is just a part of intelligence gathering. It's not anything nefarious, at least from our point of view in the United States.
And finally, Calvin, would you say that perhaps there's a bigger problem with, documentation, being in the right place and people coming out to say things regarding this? And this is following the previous months we've seen documents where, of course, the president is being investigated, the former president as well.
Yes, I think that the main thing that we're learning from this situation and some of the others that you mentioned is how we protect and keep track of these documents. That system has got to be reformed. Because think about it, these documents were floating out there for a month or two before the Pentagon even realized it. Same thing with the documents with President Biden, former Vice President Pence, and in some cases with former President Trump. The archives didn't really even know what they didn't have. So that's a big thing. What I also think we're going to have to consider is when things like this happen, there's always a call to say, let's limit the amount of people who have access to these documents, kind of restrict that need to know access. Here's the problem. I think that in some instances we do need to restrict it. However, we don't need to go too far, because let's not forget that one of the things that made September 11th a challenge was because our intelligence services weren't sharing information with each other like they needed to. So I think we need to examine that, but we can't overcorrect, or else we get in a situation where we're not information sharing in a way that's helpful to maintain our security.
Calvin, always a pleasure. Thank you, Calvin Duck, for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says the United States has never given up attempts to conduct intelligence activities on Russia, and that this will always be met with corresponding countermeasures from Moscow. He adds that Brazil's efforts to mediate in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine deserves attention, as any idea that takes account of Russia's interests deserves attention and certainly needs to be listened to. But Kremlin hasn't seen any proposal from France. Various countries and world leaders, including China's Xi Jinping, France's Emmanuel Macron, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, they've tried to position themselves as possible peacemakers. Nearly 14 months into what Russia calls its special military operation in Ukraine, Russia says it is open to talks, but has made clear these would only take place on its own terms. It says Ukraine must accept the new realities on ground, specifically its annexation of 4 Ukrainian territories dismissed as illegal by Kyiv and the West. The plan to provide Australia with nuclear-powered attack submarines and support to Ukraine's military were on the agenda in a recent meeting between U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and his British counterpart Ben Wallace during the meeting at the Pentagon. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said the AUKUS alliance showed the country's commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific. Minister Wallace praised the long-term commitment of the alliance and even joked that the plan would yield results so far in the future that neither him nor Austin would be holding the office by the time the first AUKUS submarine is delivered. The United States, Australia and Britain are planning to provide nuclear-powered attack submarines expected to come into force by early 2030s to counter China's ambitions in the Indo-Pacific.
Since this time with the invasion of Ukraine, we've seen a more anxious world and a more unstable world. And without US leadership, we would be in a worse place. Whether that is in the Pacific, whether that is in Ukraine, whether that is in European defence, or indeed worrying so the developments in the Middle East around Iran.
So Ben, thanks again for everything that the UK is doing to strengthen Ukraine's self-defense. I look forward to a great discussion, including finding ways to continue to work together to help Ukraine and to further strengthen our partnership.
A growing list of countries have evacuated their diplomats and citizens from Sudan's capital as fighting continues into a second week. The UK has evacuated diplomats and their families, but an estimated 4,000 British citizens remain in the country. More than 1,100 EU citizens have now been evacuated from Sudan, according to an EU diplomatic source. Officials are working on the basis that around 1,700 citizens had been in the country when the violence erupted, with more flights planned for today. Figures were said to be changing constantly. The US has airlifted embassy staff out of Sudan by helicopter, but says it will not evacuate US citizens living in the country. An apparent lull in fighting between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces has created a window for evacuations. But millions of Sudanese remain stuck in a city that's been transformed into a war zone. They've been left without access to basic services and trapped in their homes amid violence that has killed hundreds of people. Despite sustained pressure from the international community, the two sides have failed to abide by a temporary truce. But the situation was calm enough over the weekend for the United States to extract embassy staff that triggered evacuations by other countries. On Monday, France and Germany said they'd got 700 people out. Fighting between the Sudanese army and RSF paramilitary force has left 420 people dead since it began the 15th of April. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell says more than 1,000 European Union citizens were evacuated from Sudan over the weekend amid the deadly fighting between rival army factions. He said that the EU bloc would continue pushing for a political settlement to end the crisis that could worsen and have an impact across the African continent.
It has been a complex operation and it has been a successful operation. First, the staff of the European Union, 21 people are already in Europe, and many more European Union citizens and others are already out of Sudan. I cannot give you the concrete figures, more than 1,000 people for sure. I want to thank France, especially, for taking our people out. And I want to thank the combined efforts of many countries that took their nationals, but also all nationals that they could pick. So it has been a successful operation, but complex. I was in touch with the two generals fighting in Sudan. And now the ceasefire has stopped, it's over. We have to continue pushing for a political settlement. We cannot afford that Sudan, which is a very populated country, implodes, because it will be sending shockwaves around the whole Africa.
And that's Diplomatic Channel this week. You can watch this and other episodes again on our YouTube channel /channelsweb and our channels playlist. I'm Millicent Walker. I'll see you next time.